All right. Hi friends, my name is Emily and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones. Just in case you found this video out of context, this is book 4 in a larger series where we're exploring the haunted house together. It's a book club. So this is 4 of 6. And I guess quick recap while folks have a moment to trickle in. If you are here for the live, say hi. If you're here on the replay, let us know what you thought of Mapping the Interior. So, as a quick recap, what we have covered so far is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, Helen Oyeyemi's White is for Witching. Last time was The Graveyard Apartment by Mariko Koike, translated from the Japanese by Deborah Oliver Boehm. And today we are returning to the roots of this book club, which was small books, novellas, and we are looking at a novella by Stephen Graham Jones. So once again, this episode is intended to be a standalone, but at the very end, I do want to try and make connections to the previous works. A little bit of housekeeping for the live. So we're going to move from no spoilers to light spoilers to full spoilers, and then to making connections to the other 4 or the other 3 works, I guess, at this point. And then the last piece of housekeeping is, so I am Canadian, and here I feel like the politically correct term is Indigenous. And it's like using the term Indian for an Indigenous person is an in-group term. So I have probably defaulted to Indigenous when I'm putting things in my own words, but we'll use, like, if a speaker or a critic or the text itself says Indian, I have used that to refer to the characters. So if you hear me say that, it is an in-group term, but it's going to be quoted. So no spoilers. So we usually start out with some general reactions. Was this a new read for you? Have you read any of Stephen Graham Jones' works before? So this was my first Stephen Graham Jones. It's definitely a name that I recognize working in the book space. Like, I used to be a bookseller working in this online space, dabbling in horror literature. It's a name that comes up. I just hadn't picked him up yet before this book. So this was my first one. My next question for folks, and again, if you're here on the live, feel free to say hi, feel free to respond. And if you're on the replay, you're welcome to leave me any comments. So my next question for us is, did you enjoy this? What did you think of this book? And I have to say that my feelings shifted somewhat radically from my first read to the reread for this book club. And initially, I didn't like this. I didn't like the writing, and I didn't like the ending, and it felt like for such a small book, it took a really long time to get through. But then on the reread, I had sort of different expectations for the writing, and I felt like it went a little bit quicker, and I knew where we were going, and I actually came to appreciate the ending. So I'm curious if this was your first time reading Stephen Graham Jones, if you're not used to his writing, because that is something. Move on to the question, what did you think of the writing? In doing the research for this, I heard a lot of folks, a lot of reviewers say that they really struggle getting used to his writing style, but once you've read a couple of things, you just sort of know what to expect. You have, I guess, a familiarity with his voice, and it becomes easier. But like the first time I read this, I feel like the best way to, I was trying to think, like, how would I describe this? And I feel like it's, if you've ever gone into a lake and on the way out, it's super easy. And then you turn around and you try and go back to shore and you realize that you've actually, it was so easy to walk out because there's a bit of an undertow. And like that struggle, if you try and walk straight back to shore against the undertow, that's what it felt like reading this book a lot of the time. Like it felt like I had to do so much work to make sense of what's going on. And I realized that part of it is like the structure, that like this is sort of supernatural. It's somebody reflecting back on their life. It's a child's point of view. And so I think that just approaching it the first time, not knowing any of that, it felt like a lot of work. And it does seem that other people struggled with this as well. Just in terms of seeing the reviews, seeing some people summarize the books in their reviews, and having like kind of wildly, hey Amanda, how are you? What did you think of mapping the interior? So it seemed like other people were struggling with this as well, just in terms of recounting basic details, that things that I thought were pretty clearly stated in the text all of a sudden had like different understandings from readers. So, I mean, that kind of adds to the real, not real, like reliability of the narration, I suppose. It's interesting that Amanda, that you say that you struggled with this one too, that you weren't sure what you were expecting, but it turned out to be very different. I kind of feel like whoever did the job of the blurb on the back did a bad job. And like starting with the fact that there's like a typo on this version of the book that says that Junior is 15. It's like, and I thought maybe like I read it wrong. And so like later in the book, I noticed that like, oh, I was on the cusp of turning 13. So the whole book, he was 12. So I don't know where 15 came from. And then on the reread, there are a couple of explicit mentions of him being 12 years old, or like the grade difference between him and his brother. Like when he was 4 and had pneumonia, his brother was like just a baby. So like you can kind of do some math here and be like, he can't be 15. So just the fact that like a basic fact about our character is wrong in the back of this book. I then wonder about like direct quote, when he follows the spirit, he discovers his house is bigger and deeper than he knew. And I took that very literally. I was expecting something more like House of Leaves, where you have this sort of wacky man exploring this like impossible basement that just keeps going and going, and like you twist the book with the twists and turns in this House of Leaves, right? That's sort of what I was expecting. To be something like wrong with maybe like is it like a multiverse situation? Like what sort of universe, what timeline he's in? That's kind of what I was expecting. Or something more like White is for Witching, where like within the walls of the house, there are the silver women, and then like they go up to the attic and there's like this extra space that people don't go to. Like if the house is bigger and deeper, I feel like it's a metaphor, and that kind of sets up a different expectation. Like if I'm thinking genre horror, I'm not, which is what I was thinking when I picked this up. I'm not thinking, oh, it's a metaphor for his house being bigger and deeper, like emotionally deeper. So yeah, my expectations were quite off. And I wonder if that's also, other than like the struggle to get through it, if that was also why I didn't like it the first time. On the reread, I ended up finding a lot of joy in some of the really childlike moments, like realizing that Junior's actually 12, his brother is like 8 or 9, so like they're they're kids. They're like in middle school, right? They shouldn't be tiny adults. And you have these moments, one of my favorite moments. If you have a favorite moment, please let me know in the chat. I loved the kid logic of Deadfoot. So Junior figures that he was able to see his dad the first time that he sees him because he was sleepwalking. And so like he sort of walked into this other where and when. We're going to borrow Stephen King's words for like layering worlds that are sort of close together. So he sleepwalks into this other where and when. And so kid logic, if you make your feet fall asleep while you're conscious, you should be able to like sleepwalk into this like world that's only accessible when you're sleepwalking, when you're not conscious. I love it. And so can you just picture him like tying this jump rope so tight around his legs? Like, I loved it. Hey, Lydia. We're just talking about any favorite moments in the text. Yeah, I really loved the kid logic moments. Another one that I want to bring up later, but is also a favorite moment, is the playing pirate ship with that tetherball pole. That he digs this out. Like there's some bigger stuff going on, like with his brother's medical stuff, with like the mom always having to work, like whatever this like spirit is, living in kind of a shitty neighborhood with a shitty neighbor and their scary dogs. But like there's this little moment of joy where they just get to play and be kids and pretend, and they take the tea towel and they make a like skull and crossbone on it in masking tape and put it up on the top of the flagpole, and they're playing pirates. And I love those little moments, and really came to appreciate them on the reread. So the other thing that's probably worth mentioning is just a little bit about the author in case folks didn't look up Stephen Graham Jones. So he is a Blackfeet Native American, an enrolled member of the Blackfeet tribe of the Blackfeet Indian Reservation of Montana. I, while trying to like reread this and look for details, tried to figure out if there's a specific place noted here. I couldn't find one, so I don't know where this book is set. It has a sort of like everywhere feel to it, except for the fact that it gets cold enough that their pipes can freeze because the landlord has to go under the house and wrap their pipes. So, I mean, that still leaves a lot of the United States. Stephen Graham Jones generally writes experimental fiction, horror, crime, science fiction, and he has this like huge body of works. Like I was surprised that only a few of his works have come across like my For You page, my recommendations, because he has so many works. And I am curious to read more. I'm curious if folks who read Mapping the Interior, if you would consider reading anything else by him, given the taste that you got here. And something that Jones advises other Indian writers to do is to write in genres forbidden to Indigenous people, because historically publishing has wanted to sell trauma narratives. And so if a publishing house was going to buy a manuscript, it has to be something that you can sell to white people, which is trauma porn. And so it is nice to see now with folks like Stephen Graham Jones, Sherry Demoline, who else? Eden Robinson. Like there are Indigenous folks writing fantasy literature, writing horror literature. It's nice to see this, and I like that he gives that advice as well. So Amanda in the chat says, I'm curious to try something else, even though I was unsure of the writing style. I'm in the same boat. I kind of want to try the big one. I think it's Only Good Indians. It's the one with like the deer head on the Canadian cover, at least. I have heard very mixed things about that. But then if it comes back to like being familiar with his writing style, will it land differently because I've had a little taste somewhere else? Oh, Lydia, you've read it. And it was a good read. Excellent. Okay. So yeah, I do think that I would try more by him. So I'm curious if folks want to talk a little bit about the characters. What did you think of these characters? Because while reading the story, which is small, it is a novella. So it's not going to be the most robust, right? Like we're not getting a like Tolkien-esque or a Stephen King like 1,000-page doorstop. So the characters do have to be a little more sparing. But it wasn't until I was trying to go back and like make little character blurbs of like what we know about each character that I realized how bare bones they are. And I'm curious if other folks felt this way, if you felt that the characters were a little bit flat, or like, are they memorable? Is anyone other than the father memorable? Because I feel like, and we'll get to it later when we move into spoilers, there's a scene with the father that I find like deeply upsetting, like physically kind of repulsive. And so the father sticks out in my mind, but the other characters are kind of like I have to work for it. So to just sort of refresh our memories in case it's been a while for folks, we have Junior, who is our narrator. So I am going to go with what is in the text, that he appears to be 12 years old, and he will have his 13th birthday before the end of the book. And I believe what we have is like a 40-ish year old Junior reflecting back on this time when his family first moved to this modular home, when he first saw the spirit of his father come back, to give us the context for the twist ending that we will not talk about now. So I think we have a fairly unreliable narrator in that if we were in the time space where Junior is 12, he's a child, he's sleepwalking, and a lot of big events happen while he's unconscious for whatever reason. So there are some like big assumptions, some childlike assumptions that he makes as well. He tells us at the beginning of the book that I was 12 the first time I saw my dead father cross from the kitchen doorway to the hall that led to the utility room. And he doesn't really see him as much as he like senses him. I don't think he physically sees the father until much later. It's like a sense of someone in fancy dance regalia more than like physically seeing something with form, right? And I feel like that gut feeling of like wanting it to be your dead father who has come back feels very innocent and childlike. And because of that sort of willingness to jump to something in a very childlike way, I feel like we can't trust him. And then there's also like the 30 years of time that have gone by the time we get to 40-year-old Junior telling us about this, for things to shift, to be misremembered, to become more supernatural, to become less supernatural, right? Like what does he remember so many years later? And the other thing we know about Junior is that he looks like his father. His mother says, "I never tell you because I don't want to make you sad, but I remember him from elementary school. if we were back home, everybody would be saying it. And so it's like this, again, I'm also reading The Body right now, so I'm very like in Stephen King mode, but I'm thinking of like twins, of that twinning effect, of mirroring characters, of the fact that he looks like a little carbon copy of his dad. And I think the implication there is he is very much on a similar path to his dad if big changes don't happen, like the mother taking them from the reserve to go to a different school so that he has a higher chance of graduating, right? Like, I think that's maybe what we're supposed to get with this. Like, you look exactly like your father. We have Dino, who's the younger brother who appears to have an undiagnosed intellectual disability and untreated epilepsy. So we learn that Dino has been sort of zoning out during meals or his favorite TV shows. He just like stares, like he zones out, which I think are the little seizures. I can't remember what those are called. But then there are the big, like full body, is it clonic seizures, something like that? The grand mal seizures. And so it's sort of escalated from him zoning out to having like really physical seizures. And at this time, we learn that he's maybe had 5 or 6 that they know about, but they haven't sought medical treatment for it. And the other thing that we really see with Dino is another medical incident is when he's having the seizure, Junior puts a little action figure in his mouth, which I think we all know we shouldn't put anything in the mouths of people having seizures, but I should just say it. Don't do that. When he puts his hand in his brother's mouth, again, another one of those like really childlike moments where you're like, that's not a good move. But anyways, so he bites off the foot and he's swallowed this like foot of his action figure. And the mother's concerned about that one because having an intestinal blockage is like an immediate thing that needs to be dealt with. But like the non-physical, the more mental, intellectual things, she kind of is turning a blind eye to. And I imagine that has a lot to do with their financial situation, and the fact that this is probably set in the States. In Canada, we do have publicly funded healthcare, so the barrier would be finding a doctor, especially if it sounds like they're kind of in a rural community based on the neighbor living in a shack. And like they don't seem to have anyone else around them other than this one neighbor. So I'm thinking the barrier in most cases, in this case, would be the financial one, that they live in the States and that they would have to pay thousands of dollars for multiple assessment appointments. And then this is something that Dino's going to have for life. So like the associated lifelong care and medications, right? So I find it sad. And it, I think, speaks to the ways in which systems are broken. And also like their poverty. That's another thing that this book is talking about. And I guess allowing us to see as readers is like the continued poverty of this family. I don't know that Dino is a character. And I know I put him in this list of characters, but I'm gonna question that. Is he a character or is he a plot device? And again, that will come back when we talk about the ending, when we're into spoilers. Because he is sort of at the center of anything that moves the plot forward. So then we have the mom. The mom, she lives for her kids. We've been told that she left the reservation to give her kids a better life so that they could attend a school where they would have a chance of graduating, like it has a higher graduation rate, that she works so hard. And Junior tells us, quote, "I'm not saying she was the perfect mom, but she would always pick us over whatever else there was. When we left the reservation, it was for me and Dino, not for her. Unlike Dad, she wasn't still living her high school years 5 years after high school," on page 30. And we also learn that even though she doesn't have the like community support, immediate community support, of like friends and family and neighbors on the reservation, Junior does talk about how the mother does have enough ties to her family that if she ever needed them, she could fall on them for support. So she's slightly more isolated now that they are off the reservation. And I feel for her. I feel like I'm officially old, but like watching my friends who have children, it's all of us like child-free folks who then become like the support systems too. Like your kid is sick, oh, don't drag them to the pharmacy. We'll go pick that up. We'll come over with like a kid-friendly meal for them. It's a lot of the networking that makes raising a human easier, that the mom has given up. And we see her risking her job because she doesn't have that support system, right? She is the single caregiver. When Junior swallows that thing, she rushes home to pick them up and like rushes them to the hospital, knowing that she's going to get in trouble at work for that. But she doesn't have anyone to call to do that, right? And then we have the father. And in my notes, I have like, father? Because I don't know if it's the father. Junior's convinced it's the father. We're going to come around to that eventually, whether we think it's the father. But we have somebody that Junior's thinking of as his dad, who is walking through the house in like full fancy dancer regalia, that he never wore in life. It's sort of like the thing that he wanted to do, he wanted to be, but he never got his act together. He was very much living this like high school dropout life of poverty and crime. And he sort of dreamed of being a fancy dancer if he could get his shit together. And so Junior sees him that way as he's come back. So, light spoilers. A lot of these things I don't quite have answers on. Like I have some questions and I have some thoughts, but I feel like the book lends itself to this like open-endedness. So I would love for folks to let me know what you think. What are we mapping, right? The book is called Mapping the Interior. And we do hear about Junior using Dino to help him measure the inside of the trailer. And he has this notebook that he calls his like science notebook, where he takes notes of the measurement of the building. So he literally maps the interior of their modular home. But then we go to the back of the book and it talks about how the house is bigger and deeper. So is the idea that they are mapping like a like family legacy, like a bloodline, a something that is like passing from family member to family member, and they're mapping that line of what's getting passed down. If we think about intergenerational traumas, right? I should have done more research on the American context, but like in the Canadian context, the residential school system was a project of genocide. The goal being to culturally destroy, literally destroy humans. And so folks who lived through the residential school system were abused in the residential school system, didn't grow up loved or parented, then graduate the residential school system, and are adults in the world, have children, have no idea how to be a functional adult or parent because they never had a model of that, right? So you have this like passing, right? And so are we mapping something like that being passed? Because we don't have mention of grandparents. We don't hear about the father's parents at all. We just hear that he is somebody who didn't graduate high school, lived a life of poverty and crime. And so, like, are we mapping this? Do you know what I'm trying to say? I feel like I'm repeating myself. Are we, I guess, tracing the line of how these things get passed, right? Or is it asking us, and it could be and both, and are we asked to think about the arbitrary borders that colonialism put on Indigenous folks, right? Like, for example, the Canada-US border is a colonial border. It maps land that traditionally folks, Indigenous folks, like moved across these borders. So are we evoking this idea of colonization, like creating a little box and being like, this is where you exist on the map? And we do have, like, again, this is a horror novel. It's about this weird supernatural experience. But the, like, there are like little things that if it were wholly real would be the sort of trauma porn that Jones seems to ask writers to resist. So we can see things like with the cop, the mom's dating the sheriff deputy, I think, and he makes some things just go away. So there's like some corruption. And what else is there? There, like, I'll think of them later. But there are like these little moments where we can see like larger social things that are on the fringes of this spirit showing up in the house.